Hello, everybody. This is Cyrus with Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics, where we talk about astral projection, out of body experiences, life after death, and all of those pretty important subjects. And I'm author, researcher, and tonight you might be wondering what the heck space Nazis has to do with any of the things I just listed. And the answer is actually has quite a lot to do with those subjects because what I'm talking about predominantly are consciousness states. And there's some very weird subjects out there related to ultimately what everything in life is, which are states of consciousness. And it's why I take everybody's stories quite seriously, because one thing that you learn from the out-of-body experience, astral projection type of field is that there's no limit to the kind of weird stuff that can be out there and that we can experience. Let me just check my thing, make sure my audio is working. Perfect. Okay. Been having some audio issues. This is the second time I've done this video tonight, and I'm just hoping I get it right the second time because my microphone failed on me last time. Anyway, so one thing you learn is that there's all kinds of crazy experiences that can happen on an astral level. So the topic of space Nazis. So first let's back up and look at the topic of alien abduction, because this is actually a variant of alien abduction. So in my view, there is no definitive proof that alien abduction is, or at least always is, a physical experience on this side. It appears to me that alien abduction experiences can happen. You could be laying in bed with your spouse, and your spouse won't even know it, but you're on board a spaceship, having experiments done to you, right? And this has to do with the things that we learn about in this channel, namely that when you are out of your body, not always, but most of the time, we are in what's called the astral body, which is a duplicate of this body. So on the astral side, the rules of physics are more lenient, which is why sometimes we call it a non-physical space. But it doesn't really mean it's non-physical. In fact, it can be a place that's just as solid and physical as the world we're in right now. And so this confuses a lot of people. It also leads to the phenomenon of people not knowing that they were in an out-of-body state, because they didn't physically feel any different than being on this side. This is also something that we hear reported from people who die, and they are not aware that they did die because to them they don't feel any different. So whatever ETs are, we don't know if they entirely are entities from other planets, because they could just as likely be interdimensional entities that live in these astral states or in the astral cosmos, which I would keep in mind that this entire universe has a frequency that can be changed from the frequency that you perceive it at. So the astral cosmos is just as big as the cosmos on this frequency. So an extraterrestrial may not necessarily be an extraterrestrial from this dimension. It could be an interdimensional / extraterrestrial, or maybe not even extraterrestrial at all. Maybe there's entities that exist on this planet or on facets of this planet on the astral or interdimensional side. There could be whole civilizations of entities and people and creatures that we couldn't fathom. And for whatever reason, maybe they like taking humans, whether it's in our physical bodies or in our astral bodies, which, to them, the astral body would be the normal body, and this body would be like some kind of a shell that we're temporarily incarnated into. So chew on that one for a minute. So the topic of space Nazis, just like in the film Iron Sky, the smash 2012 hit about Nazis living on the moon. I don't think it really was a smash hit. This is an element of a variation of the alien abduction topic known as the MILAB, or the military abduction experience. The military experience or the military abduction experience, is similar to being taken by extraterrestrials, but it tends to be a lot more traumatic because, big surprise, turns out humans are a lot more terrifying than extraterrestrials, especially the power-hungry, cold-hearted, evil humans, which I think are probably a lot worse than any other species that we can think of. So, people have experiences where instead of being taken on board a spaceship surrounded by gray extraterrestrials, they end up in a military facility having all kinds of crazy stuff done to them. And like the other experience, who's to say that there isn't a government or a military existing on the astral side? Because I've been to cities, I've seen all kinds of like urban environments, I've seen the presence of government infrastructure in astral environments, and so it wouldn't surprise me if there were military installations on that side as well. And that's again how weird this rabbit hole goes. But I wouldn't, at the same time, I'm not going to discount the possibility that either type of abduction could be happening on this side. There is evidence that has been accumulated of things like implants that suggest that maybe some of these experiences are happening in our current third density bodies. So I'm not going to completely rule that out, but I am tossing this idea out there as a hypothesis that may help explain the weirdness, the inconsistency, and the inability to find proof of these experiences. So the MyLab experiences can be really interesting and super weird. There's been a whole contingent of people the last maybe 10 years who have come out of the woodwork to say that they were taken by covert military programs and served on space fleets, secret space programs out in the cosmos. And these programs were the result of governments around the world having reverse engineered extraterrestrial technology and then going out into space themselves. So, as an open-minded guy, I don't think that's impossible. If you are to believe Roswell, then that is the next logical step after Roswell, is that governments would begin using the technology, right? Alien ship wouldn't just crash and then after 70 years it would just be a museum display piece in Area 51. No, at some point that sucker would have been reverse engineered and we'd have people out in space. That's not too unbelievable to me. What does raise my alarm bells is that many of the people who have these reports say there's a variation of the same story, which is that they served 20 years, 40 years out in space against their will at being forced into joining some fleet of like space, I want to say space marines, but cliche, like some kind of space navy force, basically as slave labor. And then when their time is done, they get sent back in time, back to their body, back to where they were right when they first left. And they claim that this is done through advanced extraterrestrial technology that has given them the ability to do a kind of weird time travel process where you can have this whole thing happen to you and only, for this reality, like it you were only gone for like, you weren't even gone at all. But then you just spent 20 years doing, on a whole different life. Now, there's also the concept that people's consciousness is being borrowed. So imagine for a second that your consciousness is taken out of your body and implanted into a new body, and then they use that body to take advantage of your slave labor, and then when they're finished, they pull that consciousness back out and stick it back into your mind, in the body you have right now. Is that beyond belief? Not totally if this is in the context of an astral experience, because we know that there's this time distortion effect that happens beyond the veil. People can have a near-death experience that lasts for them. I've heard people say that they've spent months in like a different realm, studying books and libraries and meeting with ancient teachers and hanging out with Socrates, and then they come back to their body, and only like they had cardiac arrest happen for 2 minutes, but for them it was months. I can have an astral experience laying on my bed by taking a midday nap and be out for what felt like hours, and then I checked the clock and 10 minutes went by. So this is part of the non-linear time that seems to exist outside of our normal spatial perception. And in that context, is it still so difficult to believe that maybe a civilization or some group, maybe a negative group that's living on the astral side, can pluck someone's consciousness from their body on this side and make them endure something that feels like 20, 40 years, and then stick them back in this body, and then people here would never even know? It just happens one night when you go to sleep, and you end up spending 20 traumatic years being treated like a grunt in some horrible military that you want nothing to do with. Well, that's what these guys claim is happening to them. And yes, it is terrifying. And it's all the more reason that we need to keep those positive vibrations going and keep our thoughts clear of negative, like excessive negative influence, because it's more difficult for negative things to happen to people on an interdimensional level if their vibration doesn't allow it. It's almost like there's a level of free will involved. If we choose the negative, the dark, then the negative and the dark will find us. But we always have the power not to choose that. So not to get ahead of myself too much, I want to show a couple videos of people who claim to have served in a German secret space program. And many of these insiders, there's many insiders, they have similar themes in their stories, right? And some of the popular ones include Randy Kramer, claims he spent time on planet Mars. We have Tony Rodriguez, who I'm going to show you in a minute, claims that he was on a German secret space fleet, space Nazis, for about 20 years on the moon of Ceres, an underground base. We have the most famous of all is a guy named Corey Goode. He has a 7-season show on Gaia TV where he also talks about his time as an alleged government empath, and he also references the German secret space program, space Nazis. Who else? We have Laura Eisenhower, the great-granddaughter of Dwight D. Eisenhower. She actually claims that she too was part of one of these secret space programs. And those are just a few names that come to the top of my head. We'll talk. Also, we'll look at another lady too. I have her YouTube clip set up as well, and she also claims to have served the German secret space program, and like all of them, basically as a slave. So these experiences tend to be intensely negative in nature. Like Tony Rodriguez, his story is extremely interesting. It is very traumatic at the beginning. There's always a common thread in these experiences of people undergoing severe child abuse or satanic ritual abuse. They all say this relates to how people get indoctrinated into these secret societies where they end up in secret space programs. And a psychologist, their ears would perk up at this, because they might say maybe these stories are a coping mechanism for having underwent some kind of severe child abuse, and then this was created out of that trauma. For me, I don't know. I can't say yay or nay to that idea, and I'm not a psychologist. But, right, so there is a common thread about severe abuse. But like with Tony Rodriguez, who I'll show you here in a minute, he talks about living in the space of the moon Ceres, and it's very interesting. Like, I write some science fiction, and when I write, can't even compare to this guy's whole story. And you can find the whole thing on YouTube. It's extremely colorful, very interesting to watch. And if you think about it in the context of some kind of weird abduction, out-of-body experience, it's a little easier to swallow. But he talks about a strip club at this underground base in Ceres, and he falls in love with like a stripper. There's ETs walking around every day of different shapes and sizes. That he basically was like began as a slave on a ship, being forced to basically do just manual boring labor every day, but he managed to move up a little bit, ended up getting a real salary. It's a long, very interesting story, and let's hear what Tony has to say. So let me pull up his YouTube. So he's going to be talking about basically, some of his initial experiences joining the German secret space program, Space Nazis, and how that went. And just one more precursor, in case you're wondering, why the hell is there a German secret space program? There's a guy named Michael Salla, and he believes that this is a literal thing, and basically the Germans in the 30s and 40s aligned themselves with some extraterrestrials, and those ones broke away from Hitler and went to go build a base down in Antarctica. And while the Third Reich ended, these guys, I guess they weren't big fans of Hitler anyway. They built their own thing and ended up going into space. World War II never really ended. It just went galactic, which sucks because I'm not a big fan of Nazis. And then you add space to that, and what's worse than space Nazis, right? I mean, maybe space Nazis on fire that shoot acid and venom at you, that would be a little bit worse. But this is pretty much as bad as it gets. So this is what Tony Rodriguez has to say. Let me backtrack. This is a channel called Dauntless Dialogue, and they have a lot of interesting interviews with people like this. So it's a fun channel. Go ahead and check them out.
People are chosen because of genetics, because they are qualified to do certain tasks. Some people are just good at something, so they need that up there in these colonies. And some people are being taken just as a brute force labor force out of prisons and things, and for slave labor. And in my case, I was taken for 20 years, and woke up with no memory of my life, no memory of mom and dad, and I lived 20 years. And then at the end of that, I was moved from one project to another, to a few different places, and I ended up on the Ceres planetoid, a dwarf planet just past Mars, where there is a German-based breakaway group from Nazi Germany, from the from the World War II Germans that had gone into space and built a colony there. I ended up being 6 years basically on Earth in that time, and then was moved to Mars on a project that was canceled, that didn't work, so it was canceled, and then I was kind of reintegrated into a new system. They give you an aptitude test and trained me on a ship, and then I was moved to Ceres colony, and I lived the rest of my 20 years there. And at the end, I was put back. They have a base on the back of the moon where they do a lot of the work.
Nazi moon base.
Age regress put back in my original body. However, that we could talk about that later. There's a lot of other info besides anything that I've said on that technology. And I woke up on a table with aliens there, not remembering the 20 years this time, but remembering my original life. And then they put me back, that night. I woke up the next morning. I was a changed person. I wasn't the same. But I had no memories really of what happened to me. In March of 2015, I had repeated headaches, and I'd always had memories of the initial abduction of the Gray, and sitting in the base, I'd always had...
Let me just jump in real quick. So Tony, when he was first taken on this program, he was basically, it started out like a traditional alien abduction situation because it was gray aliens who came into his room, and that's how he ended up in this situation. So a lot of people have theorized about that as well. So what exactly is going on with these gray aliens? Could this experience somehow be like memories that gray aliens implanted into him? Like, that's a whole different line of thought. So that's a little bit about what Tony Rodriguez has to say. I do suggest, if you want to have some fun, you can listen to his whole story on YouTube. I want to switch to Penny Bradley, and this is a lot more tragic and a lot more intense, and I would advise not to listen to this if you're particularly squeamish. Like Tony Rodriguez, like most of these guys, she describes intense ritual satanic abuse that she underwent as part of the initiation, and the extreme brutal nature of these alleged German secret space program military operatives. And in this clip, she's describing some of what she went through as kind of corporal punishment or techniques used against her to keep her and all of the other German secret space program slaves in line. So I'm gonna let her talk, and this is the channel called Super Soldier Talk, where they interview a lot of people with these stories. And like I mentioned, these stories are common. There's, one time I went to a Facebook group, and there were dozens of people all claiming to have had experiences like this. So pretty crazy stuff. Let's hear what Penny Bradley has to say.
Later on, when I was being weaponized, if I didn't perform to standards, I would be electrocuted. And I'm not talking about a taser or a cattle prod. I'm talking about an electric chair. They had a regeneration tank so that when they killed us, they could bring us back with full memory of them having killed us. The end result was not only did they have the 13 by 13 by 13 cube of bubbles or altars that Stuart Swerdlow describes, but they also taught us, you can't die. We won't let you die. You can die all you want, but you don't get to stay dead. So there is no fear of death. Actually, most of us kind of welcome the eventual death because that's the only freedom we ever get. And the other thing is that since death is not an option, we have to do what we're told without questioning or arguing. Most of the altars have no ethical compass at all. So they're basically a blank slate that holds the memory of a torture. And they fill it with whatever they want. And generally anything like ethics or values or caring about people is not what they want you to have.
So she's talking about how they use like MK Ultra techniques on the new slaves in the German Dark Fleet, that they use brutal psychological torture and brainwashing on to basically turn them into just blank slates, and then they fill those up with like horror and sociopathic traits and like all the worst things to be able to create the most efficient killing machines possible. So that's kind of what she seems to be describing in this video, and like the others, there's a lot to unpack. It's a big story and very traumatic, very sad. And no matter what the case is, if this is purely psychological, it was created by something that must have happened that was similar. If it was an astral out-of-body experience, then it goes to show you just how terrible some of the entities in this universe could be. And then if this was happening in this reality, and again, we see just how brutal and terrible whatever force this is that's perpetrating this, whether it really is, quote, space Nazis or who knows. So I want to kind of have one last commentary that came to my mind during all of this. Something we hear about with a lot of these guys is they will end up on a planet in this solar system that has alien life on it. So, well, at least in this case, I can think of Mars. So Tony Rodriguez, there's a new guy named, his name is Jason Rice. A few others, they all claim that Mars has parts where you can breathe oxygen and there's alien life. And makes me think that I've heard like out-of-body and astral experience reports where people have gone to other planets Where on this side, it's just it's a desert. There's no life. There's no air. But when you switch frequencies to the astral side, like a planet like Venus is suddenly filled with life and civilizations. So that to me is another indication that maybe we're dealing with something on the astral frequency. And the idea that there could be like German Nazis in space, it's not outside the realm of possibilities to me on the astral dimension, because look, let's face it, the astral dimension is the same size as the universe we're in right now. It's the same universe, but it's a frequency higher. It's a step higher. And thus it's populated by the same residents of this side who live on that higher frequency. So who's to say that, Nazis didn't carry on their empire on the other side? Who's to say all kinds of weird things? So there's many different possibilities about what's going on here. Even from a strictly psychological sense, that there are no space Nazis, it's still a very interesting field. And so I wanted to bring that to you guys' attention, and I really want this to be a lesson in just the scope of experiences that can happen and just how traumatic and terrible some experiences can be. I'm not saying this to scare people. I'm not saying this so that you're going to be freaked out about having out-of-body experiences, but I do want people to be aware of the possibility of intensely negative things happening to them, and to also keep themselves firmly reminded in cosmic principles, cosmic laws of free will and cause and effect, which means that I don't believe these types of experiences can happen to somebody unless on some conscious or subconscious way it's been consented to. And this can happen via manipulation. It can happen without you knowing about it, and it can happen as a result of allowing negative forces to enter your life. So I, one time, and this is a quick anecdote, had an astral experience where I encountered a very negative entity. And it was trying to scare me by going into my mind and conjuring up the images that I would be the most afraid of. And then it was basically trying to command me to submit to it. I would never submit to this thing. I knew what it was doing. It was trying to manipulate me. If I had agreed to this entity's demands, then God knows what would have happened to me. But that it would never happen to me, because I know how the game works. I know how these experiences happen. I know the steps you can take to protect yourself. And by watching this channel, you also know those steps. And you know that in reality, unlike other dimensions, nothing can ever really harm you. Penny Bradley was saying about how they told her that they wouldn't let her die. Well, that's just the normal rules of the universe. Nobody can really die. So creatures that want to control people, they never have as much power as they want you to think that they have. And as long as you remember that, then you'll know that you'll never allow yourself to end up as the subject of any entity that wants to take you on an extremely negative experience. And you'll always have the mental power to protect yourself and to be able to lean toward the light, and to reserve the shadow merely as a fascination or entertainment, but never something that we have to viscerally experience in all the traumatic, horrible details that some of these people describe. Well, I hope you like this video. If you like this stuff, please hit subscribe, help keep this channel going, as well as the little notification bell next to the subscribe button. I'm trying to get this channel going. I really need your help. If you want to learn more about these topics, click on show more. Check out the description. I have a couple books out there: Understanding Life After Death, its follow-up Afterlife and Beyond. You may also be able to find those books at your local Barnes & Noble. And you can sign up to my classes, Afterlife University, where I talk about out-of-body experiences, after-death contact, all that good stuff. And I have a link there as well. This is Cyrus, and I'll see you on the next video.